System Shock 2 does an incredible job at letting you know that it doesn't care about you. This game is much more concerned with believability than making the player feel accommodated, which is just one of the many ways it immerses you and makes the world feel real. This is one of the main things that makes System Shock 2 such a memorable game, regardless of all the other good it does. As a whole, this game is a shining example of what good writing and extra details in all the right places can do for a game world. But one of the omnipresent factors in its immersion is the multifunction display, the MFD. One particularly interesting part of this game's design is the fact that the game doesn't pause when you have to poke around your MFD, which is a whole lot. Some of my best memories of this game are narrowly escaping a dangerous fight, finding a relatively safe place to hide, and then poking around my MFD from behind cover to read a new research report, item description, or to catch up on my audio logs and emails. This does wonders for immersion. It's practically impossible to completely take in the content of an audio log unless you're ducking in the corner, hoping with half of your mind that nothing finds you. Moments like this are what define System Shock's flavor of immersion. There's simply no escaping the horror. There will be spoilers from here on out. If my last video didn't convince you, you have to play this game. I'd also like to mention that I've decided against doing a third video on System Shock 2 at this time. Maybe later, but my third subject would make for a pretty short video. You can't pause the game when you need to equip something or use an item, you can't respec your character, and you probably shouldn't reload a save when you die, as the respawn system is integrated generously enough to not cause too many true game overs. The respawn system is a little janky. If you're on a map where you haven't activated the spawn room, or you don't have enough credits to pay for the respawn, it's game over and you have to load a save, but that's no big deal, and that system is actually used masterfully in the second to last and most horrifying level, inside the body of the Mini. Not to get much further into this tangent, but when you're inside the body of the Mini, you need to adapt entirely new logic than what you used for the rest of the game. There's no going back to cherry pick which supplies you want from previous areas. You thought the Rickenbacker was bad, but over the course of this level, those slight glimpses of what used to be the starship's interior are your only respite from the horror. This is the most apparent example of what I was talking about in the last video, an area in which, depending on your build, none of your skills are very helpful. By the end of this section, you'll be low on health, ammo, durability, battery, and everything else. Finishing this section, I was amazed to see my inventory looking pretty empty for one of the only times in the game. I had used so many items that I barely touched over the course of the game, simply as a last resort. But, back to what sent me on that tangent, the inescapable horror. Mechanically, we have the respawns, the multifunction display's lack of a pause, and the lack of a respec, turning character building into a teeth-pulling nightmare. Story-wise, however, there's even more going on under the hood. Before I go into this, I'd like to set the tone by pointing out one small detail that would be difficult to integrate otherwise. Shodan's audio transmissions are one of the coolest parts of the game, but what's even more interesting is the Mini's telepathic transmissions.
You have wounded Sextus, but we will not allow him to be destroyed. See if the Machine Mother
treats her servant with such devotion.
The Machine Mother told us of the planet of her birth.
We know how you have harmed this place with your pollution,
Your violence.
and your discord. But when we arrive there,
We will cleanse the surface of that place
and merge it with the harmony of the many.
Thousands of voices speaking simultaneously in your mind, warning you to turn back and offering you a spot in the Mini's eternal garden. What's so cool is that you can't pause these or replay them, and that you're often hearing these just as combat begins, confusing your senses and making it hard to hear the message they're trying to send you, save for a couple key points.
we do not know death.
Only change. We cannot without killing ourselves.
This sounds like a bad thing, right? It actively makes it harder to pick up on the plot, and in one case even forced me to check my objective list, which I always see as a personal demerit against myself. However, it's an absolutely essential part of my key point here, which is that System Shock 2 bends over backwards to let you know that it doesn't care about you whatsoever. In secret, it does very much, but it's so aloof that you truly feel alone as you play it. Something like Half-Life 2 has some very lonely sections, but the game designers have your back, and you always feel like you have at least their company, whether you're consciously aware of their accommodations or not. System Shock 2's developers, on the other hand, put all of their talent and interest in the player's well-being towards making it feel like they couldn't care less about whether you played the game or not. It's as if they're saying, hey, we fucked up this starship with some monsters, you figure it out. It takes a ton of talent to make an engaging experience in which it looks like you don't care at all, but System Shock 2 practically leaves me with abandonment issues compared to something as accommodating and player-centric as Half-Life 2. I would argue that there's no game that makes me feel as truly alone as System Shock 2. It's deserving of Alien's tagline, "In space, no one can hear you scream." You're surrounded by characters and their remnants, but you feel so far away from help that the 67 trillion miles you are away from Earth is just a punctuation mark to the loneliness, rather than the complete sentence. So, other than the minis difficult to discern and impossible to replay telepathic messages, how does this game pull off the all-important lack of concern for a player? Well, number one in both obviousness and importance is the level design. The Von Braun and the Rickenbacker are laid out for practicality during day-to-day operations, not for being played in a horror game. It's as if an architectural drafter designed these corridors rather than a level designer. The recreation deck is low on repair kits and medical equipment, the medside deck is low on ammunition, the engineering deck has tons of protocol droids in storage, and so on. This serves two functions. Firstly, it adds to the sense of realism and abandonment by the game's designers, and secondly, when you're considering backtracking to resupply, you're not thinking, alright, which vending machine sold the repair kits? You're thinking, which deck will have repair kits? Probably engineering. In other words, you're using the more interesting parts of your brain when making decisions. The question-answering part, not the answer-recalling part. What I really want to drive home is the way that the game doesn't hold your hand, and in fact leaves you to cross the street without so much as a warning to look both ways. This isolation plays into one of the most important parts of storytelling, and the thing that defines System Shock 2's storytelling: tone. The tone is inescapable horror, met with a completely immersive and subtle touch of realistic predictability. You know what sorts of things you're going to see on the medside deck, the only question is how much it's been distorted by the mini. So, the moment-to-moment realism and gameplay have set the tone. Now, what does System Shock 2 do with that tone? Well, it builds intrigue and it creeps you out. One of my favorite things in this game are the audio logs created by people as they're falling into the mini's mental trap.
Last night I had the strangest dream. I was in my room by myself, but all of a sudden there was not just me there, but 100 me's, 1,000 me's. The strange thing was, it felt good. I felt like I was part of something, like I belong. I hope I have the same dream tonight.
That is just plain creepy, but what's more interesting is the way that it helps you understand what's at stake here. This is one of the earlier stages of someone's transformation, but there are a ton of audio logs documenting different stages. By the end of the game, you can sort of understand what it feels like to become one of the many, and again, it gets you thinking. This reminds me of one of my favorite moments in Prey.
I keep having this dream. I'm just staring into the black between the stars. There's something there. I know there is. I just can't see it. But it sees me. I can feel it. Hate us. I know you know what I'm talking about. Or you will. Soon.
As in System Shock 2, you understand how the Typhons started getting into people's heads before the situation went critical.
A worm crawled up my arm and rested on my neck. When he whispered into my ear, I felt a tingle. He told me how to make a weapon that would help us against our enemies.
There are dozens of these, and it makes the transformation into the mini so vivid. In fact, you even get to experience some of the mini's influence firsthand over the course of the game, such as this fantastic moment on the engineering deck when the mini gives you a vision, hinting at their true power in an attempt to make you lay down your weapons and join them. But back to these audio log accounts of the transformation. Hearing how happy these people are at their transformation, it's almost tempting to join them. The mini have never lied to you, and Shodan, the machine mother, does almost nothing but lie to you until the very end. Even as you kill the mini, its last words are a telepathic message to not trust Shodan.
We die.
We die. Beware the machine mother. She is a stranger.
She is a stranger to everything we cherish.
And as soon as the mini is destroyed, Shodan instantly betrays you. What I think is especially interesting is that you go as deep into the mini's biomass as possible, before going as deep into Shodan's mind as possible, to the point where you're literally inside her memories of System Shock 1. I'll get to what happens next a bit later, but to anyone who heeded my spoiler warning and played through the game, I'm sorry for that ending cutscene. Clumsily segueing back to an earlier point, I'd like to continue talking about the incredible world building. Rather than solely focusing on how things work aboard the Von Braun and the Rickenbacker, we get to see a ton of info about what's been happening back on Earth, and how the culture has evolved through one key detail: item descriptions. So much flavor text that you'd be hard-pressed to get through it all in one playthrough, especially considering that the game doesn't even pause when you decide to read it. Using the MFD's question mark button on any item will give you an incredibly interesting description of the item, its origins, its functionality, and often hinting at something larger happening in the game's world. For example, here's the description of a small beaker, one of the most mundane objects in the game. Shielded beakers are usable for medical and chemical experimentation and storing and transporting small amounts of hazardous materials. While most DNA and fusion clipping is done via protein databases, this small beaker is still an effective way to test new compounds of both carbon and non-carbon based compounds. So from that we can infer that the humans in the world of System Shock 2 know all about genetic modification and have probably done away with most birth defects as a result, all because we wanted to ask the game about beakers. Here's one more example, the cigarette packs. As my testimony indicated the last time I stood before this committee, there is still no clear evidence that cigarette smoking has proven to be harmful to the health of the smoker. Jack Sutton, CEO of Uplift Tobacco. Every box of the tobacco conglomerate's new Philo filter tip cigarettes comes with 3 optional experience-enhancing additives available at the touch of a button. The Mint-O-Matic button infuses your smoke with a menthol eucalyptus mint blend. The Kicker button adds a flavor-rich double dose of tar, nicotine, and carbon compounds. The self-cleaning coats your cigarette with a layer of smoke-depositing nanotech. So, they've managed to make a cigarette safe by adding in nanobots that clean tar from the consumer's lung. That's incredibly interesting. And it's just left there to be discovered by any player who's curious about how the tobacco companies are doing in 2112. As a side note, this is yet another thing that's in Prey and System Shock 2 alike. Here's an excerpt from a piece of in-game literature in Prey. Cigarette use was often frowned upon as a habit until advances in the food industry that allowed for consumable microspheres that captured and expelled cancer cells from the body. Simultaneously, both the fear of cancer and the stigma attached to smoking vanished within a generation. Now smoking is perceived as no more harmful than drinking a soda. You might say that Prey was ripping off System Shock 2 in a lot of regards, but that game has enough original ideas that I'd say it's more like an homage to its spiritual ancestors. I mean, would the game really be perceivably worse without this detail? Anyways, what both of these pieces of literature do is build on the world by talking about it as if it's normal. They don't say the cigarette companies found a way to make smoking safe. They instead act like all of this is common knowledge. This allows for slow exposition that preserves the immersion that immersive sims like these two are so good at capturing. With games having almost every single artistic tool at their disposal, from visual framing to ludology to music and architecture, literature is surprisingly one of the more underused tools in their belt. But when it's done right, as it does in these two games, or games like Thief 2 and Deus Ex, it can add mountains to the experience, making the world seem massively bigger than it is, and without undermining the immersion as exposition often does. These pieces of flavor text are so good that in my most recent playthrough I would go out of my way to research exotic items that I knew I'd never have the exotic skill to use, just so that I could learn a bit more about the Mini and its annelids. With all of these smaller talking points out of the way, let's get to the elephant in the room, Shodan. Just saying that name brings back 100 memories of distrust, fear, hatred, and sheer joy at how amazingly written she is. Shodan isn't exactly a complicated character, she sees herself fairly accurately as a god, and by the end of the game she's just acquiring godlike levels of power, gaining the ability to alter reality and its laws at her whim. However, you don't always need a complicated character, especially when it's one that's meant to terrify. She's simply cold, logical, and incredibly impatient. To be totally frank, I haven't played the first System Shock yet, so we'll start with her introduction in this game. Janice Polito, the head scientist and computer engineer aboard the Von Braun. She's ambitious, cautious, and cares about the well-being of her peers.
Marie, I'm sorry I've been out of touch, but I've been working on that artifact Bayless brought back from Tau City 5.
As a new player, you wouldn't know any of this, so when she's impatient and short-tempered with you over the radio in the beginning of the game,
Deck 4. Can you remember that?
You don't think twice about it. However, you might pick up one or two of her audio logs over the first act of the game and realize that she's much sweeter sounding in her audio logs than she is on the radio to you. Shodan is using Polito's voice and likeness to trick you. I'm sorry I keep pointing these out, but here's yet another Prey parallel. When you meet Chef Mitchell, he seems suspicious, and if you listen to any Chef Mitchell audio logs, you see that he has a different face and voice than the man that you met, and upon tracking him from the security station, you see that he's deceased and his tracking bracelet is in the freezer behind the imposter chef. Anyways, Polito's bitter tone could easily be explained away by all the awful things happening to the two starships, but it plants a small seed of distrust which is sure enough paid off in one of the greatest scenes in gaming since Ellen's elevator and I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream, the Shodan reveal. You wander into Polito's office, and you find her corpse in a chair.
The Polito form is dead, insect. Are you afraid? What is it you fear?
The end of your trivial existence.
Your first instinct is that Shodan killed Polito somehow because she was helping you. But towards the end of this scene, Shodan tells you that she was merely using Polito's voice to gain your trust. Looking at everything we know about Shodan logically, it seems at this point in the game that she's the lesser of two evils, and ultimately you two share a goal, the death of the Mini. While I doubt many players actually trusted her, I could see myself being willing to follow her instructions if I didn't already know she was the game's main villain. Of course, you don't actually have any say in the matter, but that's beside the point. So, willingly or otherwise, you follow Shodan's instructions for a bit, and eventually realize that FTL drive designer Marie Delacroix was in the same position as you, following Shodan's advice. It makes sense that Shodan would want to use Delacroix over you, seeing as her FTL drive is the crux of Shodan's entire plan, as it allows its wielder to alter reality around the ship to, quote, somewhat arbitrary guidelines. When you pass through the umbilical and find yourself on the Rickenbacker, you're contacted by Delacroix, and she asks for you to meet her in Cargo Hold 2 at the shuttle bay. However, upon entering the shuttle bay, you find that the door to Cargo Hold 2 has already been destroyed, and that there's no visible way inside yet. While the player might want to contact Delacroix, the real reason they're in here is to destroy the shuttles so that the Mini can't use them to spread their annelids away from the ship.
You've murdered their young and prevented their escape.
That's easily the creepiest line in the whole game, so it's fitting that with that explosion, the door to Cargo Hold 2 is blasted open, and Shodan demands that you not go in there. However, if you choose to go in to meet Delacroix, you'll find that she's dead.
They've got me now, and Shodan has abandoned me. I'm not surprised. I've discovered her plans for the faster-than-light drives, who really is only matched by her imagination if she gains access to the...
Seeing as she invented the FTL drive, it makes sense that she would know what Shodan would be capable of with it, so it's not surprising that Shodan would leave her to die, and demand that you stay away from her. It's arguably pretty brave to go in there in spite of Shodan telling you not to, but don't worry, Shodan punishes you if you go in, by deleting 10 of your cyber mods.
I hope you enjoyed our little rebellion, irritant. But remember what Shodan gives.
She is more than able to take away.
Again, she sees herself as godlike, as is further indicated by that line, and she acts as a god too, creating the Mini and turning you into a barely sentient cyborg soldier. The Mini, in particular, are an incredibly strong example of Shodan's capabilities when creating life. They're incredibly advanced, and have only existed for about 40 years at the time of System Shock 2.
With only a few short years of evolution, they've been able to conquer this starship, mankind's mightiest creation. Where were we after 40 years of evolution? What swamp were we swimming around in, single-celled and mindless? What if Shodan's creations are superior to us? What will they become in 1 million years, in 10 million years? What's clear is that Shodan shouldn't be allowed to play God. She's far too good at it.
And as I said earlier, she becomes as godlike as is feasible by the end of the game, gaining the ability to alter the laws of reality in a bubble around the FTL drive, a bubble that will get exponentially bigger, eventually reaching Earth and beyond. Logically, the entire universe could become Shodan's sandbox to bend to her will. Other than a couple bits of subtle storytelling, there isn't really much more to talk about besides the other elephant in the room: the ending. To be perfectly honest, I think System Shock 2 has a great ending. Everything ties together in a nice little bow, the stakes get about as high as could possibly be believable. We have our one moment of rebellion against Shodan, and then the cliffhanger ending hints once more at Shodan's true power. Really, it's everything you want from an ending to a game like this, but that cutscene. System Shock 2 isn't a cheesy game at all. Other than a bit of questionable voice acting and the constant use of the prefix cyber, I'd say everything about the story and storytelling is aged incredibly well, but that cutscene at the end is just ridiculous. I mean, apparently shooting a TV screen is enough to kill an AI, I won't question that, but the way it's shot is ridiculous with that slow motion and the dreaded
Nah.
Then Shodan just toys with Tommy on the escape pod rather than lying dormant and injecting herself into the Von Braun before its journey back home. So rather than pointlessly call it bad, I'll suggest an alternative. How I would have done the scene if I were directing it. I would have Shodan's lines pleading the player to join her start playing as soon as her shield went down, and then start the ending cutscene right here. with Soldier G65434-2 finding himself back on the bridge of the Rickenbacker, reality stored to its original state, putting out the hail saying that he saved the day, and then cut to Johnny's log entry saying that he's returning to the Rickenbacker, cut to the escape pod entering the ship again, then cut to one of the Xerxes displays switching to Shodan's face before fading to black with a TV static effect, hard cut to logo, then the credits. It gets across all the same information as the version we got, and cuts out all the incredibly cheesy stuff, and making Shodan's behavior more in line with the rest of the game. However, this isn't supposed to be a negative video, so we'll quickly move on, as this ending is so unlike the rest of System Shock 2 that it's almost surreal. System Shock 2 is a massively clever game, in more or less every way. Other than Thief 2, Half-Life, Deus Ex, and Metal Gear Solid, I can't think of any other game of its age that's held up as well as it has. Having just replayed it for these two videos, it's absolutely timeless. I only played it for the first time about a year and a half ago, so it isn't nostalgia talking when I say that it's a more fun, engaging, and interesting experience than 99% of the games I've ever played. System Shock 2 gets as much of its replay value from the sheer depth and subtlety of its storytelling as it does from the near endless character builds. For all of the praise and Bioshocks and Tacomas and Event Zeros, I doubt I'll ever play another game that's as atmospheric and engaging with its storytelling as System Shock 2.